Welcome back, students and seekers. As a scholar of the Dawn Basin, I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through our explainer today. We're going to unpack one of the most profound, complex, and frankly magnificent texts we have in our archives, Chapter 120 of the Dawn Basin Chronicles. This isn't just some dusty story about ancient mythological battles. It's actually a masterclass in the architecture of power, corruption, and the ultimate source of light. Today, we're decoding the very foundation of this dark fantasy lore. We're looking at the celestial hierarchy, the legendary angelic entities, and those 72 crowned demons of Solomon that plague this world. So grab your notes, settle in, and let's illuminate the text.
So, imagine you're an early Dawn Basin academic right after the Concord of 72 Lanterns. You've mapped out the great tiers of angelic authority, right? You know all about the thrones of justice and the dominions of order. But there's one question that absolutely terrified these scholars. A question they were almost too scared to ask. What stands above it all? What is the actual source feeding the lamps of the virtues? Because if the angels are these incredible guardians carrying light into broken kingdoms, where do they get the light in the first place?
The answer to that terrifying question, whispered by the greatest masters of the age, was the First Radiance. Now, you've got to understand, the First Radiance is not merely the highest rank of power. It's not a person. It doesn't speak with a mouth. It's the holy condition from which all unfallen strength receives its meaning. Think of it as literally the earliest yes spoken over creation. And what makes it so utterly fascinating is that it doesn't borrow its strength from the natural world. It doesn't rise from soil, it doesn't burn like common fire, and crucially, as we'll see today, it absolutely cannot be copied by demonic crowns.
Here's our syllabus for today's explainer. We're going to start with the origin of the First Radiance, break down its 7 holy motions, and then witness the war of imitation. After that, we'll hit the climax of the glass eclipse before bringing it all down to earth with how this applies to us, bearing the radiant wound.
All right, part 1. Let's dive right into our first historical case study regarding the origin of this power.
We have to talk about Aurelian Meridian. This guy was the master of all natural power. He had literally bound rivers, storms, beasts, and seasons into one living circle of harmony to defeat corruption. He thought he had the universe completely figured out, but then he came to the basin of unshadowed water. And when he looked down, the water didn't reflect his face. It reflected every mercy he had ever refused and every piece of pride he had mistakenly called duty. It was a massive wake-up call. For the first time, Aurelian realized that nature wasn't the highest summit. Nature was merely a parable for holy power. Rivers taught movement, forests taught interdependence, sure. But the First Radiance taught why any of it actually mattered. Aurelian finally chose to kneel before that holy source, beautifully realizing that power without holiness eventually just becomes another appetite.
So, where does this radiance actually reside? It exists at something called the seraphic threshold. Now, don't picture a physical gate or a walled city. It's not like that. Think of it like heat. Heat isn't a wall you can touch, but it's a very real threshold you cross, right? This is a region of holy nearness where praise becomes fire and fire becomes understanding. There's this incredible story in the lore about a demon prince who tried to reach this threshold. He built this massive ladder made entirely out of stolen human prayers. Prayers he had completely twisted from gratitude into debt. He climbed and climbed until his crown just brushed the holy winds. And instantly, the ladder vanished. It didn't burn, it didn't break. It was simply judged unreal. Every single stolen prayer just returned to its human owner as courage. It goes to show, holy power cannot be seized. It can only be received.
Which brings us to our next section. How exactly does this primal light interact with the world? Let's take a look at how angelic scholars categorize this power.
Angelic scholars taught that the First Radiance moves in 7 motions. Now, it's vital to understand these aren't 7 separate lights. They are unified movements, just named differently so our fragile mortal minds can approach the radiance without, breaking. First up is revelation. This frees captive truth so a demon's mask falls off simply because it can no longer pretend to be a face. Second is purification, a fire that removes only what is false or dead with zero hatred involved. Third is courage, which strengthens the human will without feeding human pride. Fourth is mercy, rescuing the guilty without pretending the guilt was harmless. Fifth is judgment, which simply sets firm boundaries around evil. Sixth is remembrance, restoring forgotten names and true origins. And seventh is communion, gathering divided powers into peace without erasing what makes them different. Every single angelic entity reflects these motions, and naturally, every demonic crown violently hates at least one of them.
Okay, part 3, the War of Imitation. Because when the 72 demonic crowns encountered this First Radiance, they didn't just launch a frontal assault. No, they tried to counterfeit it.
This absolutely brilliantly illustrates the difference between human knowledge and holy understanding. Take the Crown of Knowledge, for example. This demon built a vast, sweeping library containing every law, language, and medical art in existence. And the crazy thing? It was completely accurate. But the demon hoarded this data to bend every single reader toward absolute pride. Knowledge essentially became a tool for tyrants. But contrast that with holy understanding. The Radiance didn't send an army of warriors to burn this library down, it sent a single angelic scribe named Seraphim. Seraphim stood right in the center of this massive demon library and just opened a single blank page. And on that emptiness, words appeared for every arrogant scholar to read. What have you loved with what you know? That is the core difference right there. Demonic crowns interpret the Radiance as mere data to hoard for power. Angelic entities bring understanding through humble service. The library didn't burn to the ground. Its knees simply bent toward service.
We see another incredible profile of this dynamic with Aelion of the First Lantern. Aelion was actually the very first entity sent against a crown corruption. He walked straight into Mervale, which was a province completely enslaved by a demonic marquis. Now, this marquis didn't use iron chains, he ruled entirely by despair. He taught the people that nothing ever changes, that mercy is just weakness, and surviving is the only virtue that matters. So when Aelion shows up holding just a tiny, small lantern, the marquis actually laughed at him. But Aelion just placed the lantern on the ground, and the flame inside showed every single person one single memory of uninvented goodness. A mother saw her child trusting her. An old soldier saw an enemy he had spared years ago. And the marquis, he screamed, because despair simply cannot survive remembered goodness. The people of Mervale weren't magically perfect by dawn, but they were unfinished again. And unfinished souls can always be redeemed.
Now, mortals often confuse the First Radiance with punishment. They like to imagine it as this giant cosmic sword just eager to strike down sinners. But consider the unburning fire. In the city of Orvin, a demonic count planted these horrific silver worms beneath the tongues of poets. It turned every beautiful song into something cruel and poisonous. But an angel named Maphariel didn't strike the poets down. She didn't smite them. She simply sang one note of the unburning fire. Think of the unburning fire exactly like a highly advanced surgeon's scalpel. A scalpel doesn't hate the patient, right? It carefully, precisely separates a deadly parasite from the living host. Maphriel's song caused the silver worms to just fall from the poets' mouths as completely harmless threads. It destroys the lie, the corruption, without destroying the host's actual being or identity. Honestly, it only feels like dying because so much of our identity gets built around our captivity.
And that brings us to the climax of the cosmic battle. The demonic forces finally realized they couldn't just imitate the light locally, they were going to have to warp the sky itself.
17 demonic crowns joined forces and created a sky of transparent darkness. They called it the glass eclipse. It didn't block the sun, no, it corrected it. The eclipse warped absolutely everything it touched. Justice became revenge. Faith mutated into tribal pride. It was terrifying. But a massive question arises here. If the First Radiance is so ultimately powerful, why didn't it just instantly incinerate the glass eclipse? Why did it delay? Well, scholars answer this with the 3 veils of mercy. 1. To protect the weak. Full, unfiltered radiance would instantly expose every hidden motive in every single heart, and most souls just weren't ready to see themselves with such brutal clarity. 2. To protect freedom of choice. Holy power doesn't overwhelm choice until choice ceases to exist. It wants us to awaken, not just obey like rocks rolling downhill. And 3. To protect hope. If evil is judged instantly, the story ends before repentance can even be born. The demons, of course, viewed this patience as weakness, but to the angels, this patience was the highest possible form of holiness.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it all ends. When the seraphic threshold finally opened, the First Radiance did not strike the glass from the outside with a giant thunderbolt. Instead, the glass eclipse shattered from within. It shattered through the one thing demonic glass could not comprehend: human repentance. All across the world, people simply admitted one true thing they had been hiding, just one, and each quiet confession cracked the pane of that infernal glass. By evening, the entire sky shattered into harmless rain. The historical impact on human faith here was monumental. It proved, once and for all, that the First Radiance didn't need to conquer by fear. Rather, it empowered humans to dismantle massive cosmic deceptions through simple, honest vulnerability.
Which naturally leads us to our final section, the Radiant Wound. We're shifting from epic celestial battles down to the daily, internal human struggle. How do we interact with this light today?
The First Radiance doesn't just stay up there with the angels. Fragments of it enter our mortal lives. But, and this is crucial, humans don't possess or own this power. We can't wield it like a weapon. At best, the texts say we become clean windows for it. And there are 3 very clear signs of those who carry it. First, they carry truth without cruelty. They can name evil directly to your face, but wounded people never feel hunted by them. Second, they carry mercy without surrender. They absolutely forgive, but they never, ever pretend that corruption is harmless. And third, they carry courage without intoxication. They stand absolutely firm, but victory doesn't make them drunk with power or pride.
Let's look at how this plays out in real life. We see this perfectly embodied in the Fortress of 9 Rooks. A demon had managed to convince the king there that suspicion was the same thing as wisdom. So everyone was accusing everyone else. It was a court of total paranoia. But a humble kitchen maid named Liza became a bearer of the radiance. She didn't rebel. She didn't give grand sweeping speeches in the courtyard. She simply started leaving warm bread outside the doors of the people who had been accused. It was a quiet act of humble service that reminded the guilty and the innocent alike that they were still human. The demon literally couldn't understand why its web of suspicion was weakening. And that is exactly how you dismantle modern deceptions, not with thunder, but with a faithful act that completely refuses the logic of hell.
But I have to warn you, bearing this light is not without its cost. After the glass eclipse fell, when the world finally saw its own complicity in the corruption, people experienced what scholars call the radiant wound. This is the profound pain of becoming truthful after years of surviving through illusion. And it is so vital to identify this in our daily human experience. When you finally stop lying to yourself, when you see how fear wore noble clothing in your own heart, it hurts. It really hurts. But listen to me.
This is a grief of awakening. It is not the demonic despair of damnation. The angels actually guarded this wound, knowing it had to remain open just long enough for the poison of illusion to fully leave the body. I want to conclude our explainer today with this profound proverb. It comes from a quiet angel with hands marked by light. A wound that lets truth enter is not the same as a wound that lets death rule. As you step back out into a world filled with modern deceptions and false mornings, I want you to remember the practical lessons from chapter 12. Integrity often hurts. Realizing you've been fooled by the crown of false mourning is a wound, but it's a wound of healing. Maintain your integrity by striving to be a clean window. Defend the vulnerable, carry truth without cruelty, and remember that no darkness, however ancient, has ever been original. So as you face the false mornings of your own life, ask yourself, are you building a library of pride, or are you brave enough to open a blank page and bear the radiant wound? Think on that for a bit. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.